Welcome to week 4, everyone. You've made it this far. Congratulations, especially after a challenging week, I think, with that dense passage of 3:21 to 31. Let me just express my gratitude for the generosity of your engagement with the material, including my podcast expositions. I know those are presenting for many of us some novel interpretations that have all kinds of theological and practical implications. And I just appreciate your willingness to entertain what I'm proposing and to try to follow the sort of interpretation that I am developing through the letter, even as that presents a whole variety of challenges to some of our standard ways of making sense of the language we find in Romans. There have been some really great conversations this past week, I think, really trying to probe what Paul is saying about faith, how it is that the work of Christ justifies the human, and especially how all of that is presented as having a concrete effect and therefore purpose in what Paul is arguing, and that is to exclude boasting, to rule it out by a law of faith, as Paul says. And that has helped us, I think, to perhaps make more explicit and clear the driving purpose that Paul has for writing, so that it's not simply about kind of defining individual human being status before God or something along those lines, without attention to specific dynamics of human beings in relationship with one another, both as groups and as persons, that Paul's teaching in Romans is meant to address. So I appreciate you just kind of pressing into that, trying to track with the argument, even though that has been dizzying for some of us, I think, especially this last week. This next week in Romans 4 and the beginning of chapter 5, I think you'll find that Paul's teaching is perhaps not quite so dense. I don't think so, at least, but of course still has its fair share of challenges. Now, building on what Paul has argued to this point, we're kind of coming to what many readers of Romans have identified as a kind of conclusion to the first part of the letter at the end of chapter 4, where Paul is going to switch from this language of justification to talking in other kinds of language. And in chapter 4, just to preview a little bit, the subject, which is a quite natural transition, I think, from what Paul has just said about establishing the law by teaching that justification is by faith alone rather than by works of the law, is a treatment of our relation to Abraham. How have we found Abraham to be our father? How do we find ourselves, Paul asks his most immediate readers as well as us, participating in this intergenerational family of promise. And as you'll hear me argue in the podcast for this week, Abraham is not some random example that Paul has happened upon. Abraham is a seminal figure in whom, in a sense, the whole promise of the future for the people of God and finally for the whole world is kind of planted by God. So the question is not so much about Abraham as an individual as it is about Abraham as a father, as an ancestor. And it's not so much about a system of transactions of some kind that took place between God and Abraham and therefore might be the same for us. Instead, it is about the dynamics of inheritance, how it is that the promise and its fulfillment come to this sprawling intergenerational family across time? What makes it tick? How does it work? So I hope that you'll be able to kind of frame what Paul is teaching about Abraham and Abraham's promised family in those terms, rather than kind of losing sight of the intergenerational character of this family, and therefore the nature of Abraham, not just as an exemplar or something, but as an ancestor from whom subsequent generations of the people of God are inheriting what God has promised. And that, I think, is what justification is about. It is about enjoying the inheritance that God promised to Abraham and his future, which is the subsequent generations of his family, the principal figure of which, of course, is Jesus himself. So that's what's coming in chapter 4. And then in chapter 5, there's a really kind of stunning development in some ways, because Paul suddenly starts advocating boasting. And we have been studying carefully how it is that Paul has set out to exclude boasting, to show how it is ruled out by the way that the justice of God has been revealed, especially finally in the person of Jesus and in the faith of Jesus. And here now suddenly Paul is going to turn and advocate for boasting, but of course, in a very subversive way. He's going to turn boasting on its head and show how we can boast in an anti-boasting kind of way. That might sound just convoluted, but it's actually typical of the way that Paul uses language, uses key terms, almost poetically, to create new possibilities of meaning and to help us deal with what is sometimes a problematic legacy or set of temptations, not by fleeing to some new safe space that's far away from that language or all of those practices, but instead a way of engaging the language of the legacies in which we find ourselves, even if that is to do so critically and to challenge what basic terms and practices are about, what they mean. And so that's what Paul is up to with advocating an anti-boasting kind of boasting, even as he advocated for a law of faith that rules out justification by works of the law. So you can see that same kind of dynamic there. And I hope that this is showing you how dynamic Paul's use of language is in Romans and, of course, in other letters of his. His argument, his storytelling is it's got all kinds of drama going on in it, all kinds of purposeful, poetic-like usage of words. And the tendency in the way that we have read Paul, as I've said before, is often to kind of flatten all of that out into something that comes across as doctrinaire and maybe even puritanical or sterile in terms of its abstract kind of language. But in fact, when we read it carefully, I think we find that Paul is performing something with the words that he writes. And the rich dynamics to that, while they can be confusing, show us that Paul is not simply trying to rehearse a code. He is performing something with language. And part of the purpose of that is to form us by what he has written with that language, so that we can learn the dynamics of the language of the faith rather than simply regurgitate what will effectively be a dead code. And this is where I hope that you'll find that our class is not about giving you some new snappy lingo to use to articulate the faith or make sense of life, but instead a sort of discipline, a formation by this argument of Paul's, whose effect is to enrich our own vernacular, Yes, it might add words here and there, but it's hopefully not about adding a bunch of words, and especially technical words that are not familiar ways of talking, but instead a way of enriching our speech by exposing perhaps some of the inconsistencies or incoherencies or theologically flawed ways that we have of talking or making sense of our life or even living, and encouraging us with this word to grow into the truth of the gospel as Paul has expressed it. So that's what's coming in terms of content this week. We've got some good things to think about in terms of the text itself and beyond.
Also coming this week is a new opportunity for you that we will start this week, but then maintain throughout the rest of the course. And that is to complete some of your forum response through a live video conference as a group. So starting this week, in order to make that possible as an option, everyone in the class will need to opt in to their group. And I am going to add to the end of this video a screen video or screen recording of me choosing opting into a group so that you can see how you need to do that. But you won't be able to see the forums that you're required to respond to this next week without opting first into a discussion group for the week. Now, as I say, everyone is going to need to do this, but some of those options will be video conference groups. Others of those options will just be asynchronous groups like we've had up until now, if that's what you prefer or that's what's better for you. But I certainly want to encourage you to consider joining a group that will have a live video conference by Zoom in order to just enhance the quality of our discussion with some live interaction with one another, with me. So what this will entail is if you opt into a group for the week with a video discussion, live video conference that is, you will respond to Forum 1 for the week as you usually do, as you have been doing up until now, but then you will not write a response to the prompt in Forum 2, at least you're not required to, nor will you need to comment on others' posts either in the first forum or the second forum. Instead, you'll simply gather following the instructions that you'll get with me on Zoom at the specified time, and you'll get further instructions, as I say, but we'll all be responding to the prompt in for Forum 2, and then just having a conversation about it together live, and that will count as full credit for your contribution to that forum that's required, Forum 2 for the week, and also count as all of your required interaction with other students for the week. This is my way basically of incentivizing this. I want to encourage you to do this because I really do think from my past experience that this is significant value added for anyone who participates in these video conferences. And so that's why if you do organize your time to be able to participate, I want to honor that and give you credit for what you're doing to do that. And that will thereby take the place of asynchronous work in Forum 2 and interacting with one another for the week. So that is coming, and what is going to follow now is a screen recording showing you how to opt in to your group starting in this week, week 4, and you'll need to do this for every week from here until the end of the course. So here is how you're going to opt in to your group for your discussions in the forums for week 4 and for all subsequent weeks. You're going to opt into a group whether you're going to join a group with a video conference or not, and just continue to do a discussion that is asynchronous. So To opt into your group for the week, you're going to come to Canvas and find over here in the left-hand column the people item, select that, and then the next page will give you a list of all the people in our course. You're going to choose groups, this tab up here, and then now you're going to scroll down all the way until you get to the current week, which in this case is week 4. And here you can see the options for week 4 for our course. As I said, if you want to do just an asynchronous discussion in a group for the week, then you can choose any one of these 4 asynchronous discussions. I have them divided into 4 just to keep our groups, at a scale that is conducive to good discussion. But if you want to join a video conference group, which I highly encourage, then you can see here that you have 4 options for video conferences in week 4. And so look at the time and the day, and if one of those works for you, then you can come over here and you should see a open lock sign instead of a closed one. It shows closed for me because I'm actually the teacher in Canvas. But for you as a student, as long as the group is not full, this should be open, and clicking on this, you should be able to add yourself to this group. And with that, you should be set. You'll be able to access the forums for the week. If you're in a video conference group, again, you'll post as per usual in Forum 1, but then for Forum 2 and all of your interactions with one another, you'll join a live Zoom session about which you and the rest of your group will receive instructions ahead of time with the Zoom link and just a little bit of information about how to prepare and what to expect. So, hope that's helpful. There is a group for those of us who are in the Southern California area. You can see we'll be meeting on campus at 5 p.m. on Friday. And so if that is your situation, then be sure to select that group for the week. Hope to see all of you in a video conference. And if you have any problems, please don't hesitate to reach out, and I will work with you to figure out what is not working.